My name is Joanne Murphy. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Chartered Banker Institute. I'm delighted to host our first panel with my distinguished guests, who I'll introduce in a moment. The panel today, we're really taking on from Mark's lead, and we're going to talk about what really responsible banking and sustainable skills mean, both for organisations and working with the professional bodies. And what does that mean in terms of developing a lifelong learning culture within an organisation, and also for those individuals that Mark spoke of, who will be required in future to continually reinvent themselves, to develop new skills and their personal expertise, to make sure that they actually stay relevant within the workforce. So I hope that you're going to enjoy our discussion. After I do a brief introduction with the panel members are going to give their initial view on the topic. We're then going to have some structured questions, and depending on time, we might be able to then take a couple of questions from the audience. Between them, they have a number of decades experience in learning, banking and finance. And I have Rachel Hui from the Institute of Banking and Finance in Singapore, Prasad Padmanabhan from the the Asian Institute of Chartered Bankers. I have learning practitioner Una McLean, and I have Gavin McCullum from RBS. So Prasad, just a bit of an overview and your take on the topic.
Right. I'm an outsider to the banking education sphere, really. I was in an investment bank for about 16 to 18 years. So let me lay out my wares, and I apologize if some of what I'm going to say is obvious. But let's think about responsible banking and sustainable skills. I'm not talking my own book when I say it's taken me about 3 years to realize that the best way of delivering some of this, the ideas of responsibility, integrity, conduct, so on and so forth, and to have sustainable skills is through membership of a professional body, in that it ensures a certain level of responsible banking, that sustainable skills through assessments of competency, adherences to the codes of conduct, as well as lifelong learning through CPD and the like. Now, sustainable skills that are important, I think, at the end of the day, should be things like, it's nebulous, but leadership, communications, and literally adaptability to change, or resilience. The problem is, though, I believe in normally distributed curves, so not everyone in the world. In fact, you're looking at a very small amount of people who can do that. But you see, the thing is, the technical landscape's always going to shift, so you're going to end up, I think those skills are much, much bigger, and it allows you to shift as you go through your life, basically. Reinvention is extremely tricky, as an industry, as bankers and so on and so forth. Are we talking about reskilling within an institution, or are we trying to get people ready for redundancy and shift careers to another thing altogether? So that's not been too clear to me about what we intend, really. But as I said, if communication is a good skill, then it involves networking and all that. And there was recently an FT article about what to do in redundancy, and one of it was that you should start to network now, and so on and so forth. But is that what we mean, though, when we say reskill? Are we responsible for helping the individual move out of the industry in case they do get made redundant, or are we meant to be playing a social role? It's just something to think about, basically. To me, technology is just merely a platform for delivery of services. Conduct and ethics will always be overarching. Buffett had a quote saying that when he looks for someone he hires, the qualities he's looking for is integrity, intelligence, and energy. If you don't have the first, the other two will kill you, kind of thing. So, I mean, that's entirely true. And for us in this industry, trust is supremely critical. From our experience, especially because, in Malaysia, we didn't see the global financial crisis. And I really believe that, a lot of the integrity trust issues have been brought up because of the GFC. But in a place like Malaysia, where it didn't happen, a certain amount of prescription is needed by regulators to tell the banks, that they should be upskilling their employees and making sure they're on conduct and so on and so forth. To be members of professional bodies like the accountants or the lawyers or the doctors and so on and so forth. And and the fact is, we see our bankers way more often than we, touch wood, see our doctors and lawyers. But I also think, though, to quote, to paraphrase Amy Chua, the tiger mum, if a child is left to its own devices, its default position is to do nothing. So I think there has to be a certain amount of push as well, and that's certainly where we are. I think I'll stop there. There's probably lots to delve into. I'll open up to Rachel. Was that all right?
Okay, yeah. Hi. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. I'm from Singapore, the Institute of Banking and Finance. In terms of the topic of responsible banking and sustainable skills development, I echo the points that Mr. Mark Hogan shared. So the focus of the Institute of Banking and Finance Singapore is about not just working alone. As what Mark mentioned, is collective effort. And we want to play the catalyst role of coalescing the effort across employers, union, government, and training providers. Because we think we need to work together. And also we are part of the Global Banking Education Standards Council. We think there's a lot of collaboration we can leverage on different countries' strengths in terms of the educational developments to meet the unprecedented level pace of industry transformation, job transformation, and skills transformation. Yeah, so that's what I hope you hear what my comment is. I pass back to Joanne. Yeah.
Thank you. Yuna, just to kick off with you, your thoughts?
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody here today. I'm very passionate about how people can develop and grow, and I think professional bodies have a huge part to play in social mobility for people. I also think that if you are a member of a professional body, it opens up a whole world of information and knowledge that will help you in your role. I also think, yes, we're going into a digital age, but we also need to consider people that already enrol. How do we take them with us? How do we upskill them to perform and grow? And when you consider the average age in the UK in banking is 44, a lot of those people are ready to be upskilled, want to be upskilled, want to stay in role, and that's the area that I like to focus. I like to see how we can do that. I've done quite a bit of work in Scotland. I see Alison Houston's here today. We co-chair the employer group for financial services in Scotland, and I've done a huge amount of work at looking at how we can use the apprenticeship levy to help reskill colleagues in role, how we can more align frameworks to help people, and we work closely with Chartered Banker and are hoping that we're going to make significant change in the apprenticeship levy in Scotland, which I can assure you is a little bit more difficult than it is in England to use to reskill employees.
Thank you, Yuna. Gavin, any?
Yeah, hi, good morning everybody. My name is Gavin McQuillan. I'm Head of Learning and Development for RBS. Pleasure to be here. I'm born on the 4th of August, so if anyone's got the same birthday as me, let me know. I guess it's very, very difficult to build on what Mark said. This is a key focus for us. In fact, one of our biggest strategic priorities. How do we reskill our workforce? Not just for the job that they do today, but for the career that they're going to have tomorrow. I guess from the societal part, this isn't just a financial services issue. I think this is a society issue. So for us, how do we really support the people that work for us today? Might not work for us tomorrow, but if that can be part of our proposition to our employees to give them the skills for the future, then that's got to be something that's worth investing in.
So, thank you so much. Thank you, panellists, for your initial thoughts. Gavin, can I just actually come back to you just on that thing about future skills? So, looking forward, what skills and knowledge do you think is going to actually remain going forward in the education of
So
bankers?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that if anybody knows the answer, then I don't think they know the answer, if that's the right thing. So I think there's two things for me. There's first of all, there's all the key things that everybody could talk about: data, digital, cyber, risk management, that type of stuff. And I think they will continue to develop. So, you know, the technology side as well, coding, all of that kind of good stuff. So there's a lot of technical things that I think will be there, and I think to Prashad's point, that will change as things evolve. For me, it's about what do we do and how do we help people survive in that kind of environment where what they do today will be very different tomorrow. So things like great decision making and great judgment. How do we help people be resilient? You know, if you're a 44-year-old person and suddenly we say what you do today is not what you're going to do tomorrow, that takes a bit of effort to think about. I think there's about how do you lead in that environment. So how do you lead in this changing environment is important for me. Things like critical thinking. So really a set of core skills for me around how do we equip people, not just with the technical piece, but the core skills to be able to maneuver through different careers as they go.
Thank you. It's just from your perspective, when do you think is the best stage in the sort of journey for the educational journey for a professional body to be involved in someone's career?
A professional body typically add value by having very well-designed curriculum that reflects what the employers or the consumer or the client expect out of the profession. And those individuals who want to increase the chances of promotion or get acceptance by the client, they want to add the title given by the professional body on the name card. So because of the nature of how professional bodies add value to individuals, typically those who are new to a profession, they will see the best value of a professional bodies. But given the kinds of technological changes that is going on, as what Gavin mentions, maybe someone in the 40s, maybe they are experienced banker, but now, because of the changes, the jobs is going to be different. And they need to acquire new skills to move to a new role or the current role that is redesigned. And given that context, I think professional bodies will also add value to experienced and seasoned bankers to help them to bridge the information gap. A lot of people know that the industry is changing, but what do they need to do? Because some people have gone for skills development, they think, but those skills does not help them to land into a new jobs. So, and if they go for training programs, and yet they cannot have opportunity to apply those skills, it's just like we go to the gym to do exercise. If we don't do it often, there's atrophy, right? So there is the skill you may lose that skill if you don't practice that. So it's always that need to be a linkage to the person's being given the opportunity to practice that or to move to a project team or new positions. And that's where I think the professional bodies can help to plug that information gap and the gap between the opportunities from the current job role to a new job roles. Yeah.
Thank you. You want to add, Riona, to that?
Yeah, could I just add, I do think that the earlier somebody's introduced to a professional body will help them develop in their career, because one of the things that I've seen over the years is that people focus on what they're doing in the here and now. They don't always focus on the future. They don't always look at a year, 5 years down the line. Now, anybody here a CIPD member? Okay. When you look at CIPD, they update you with things, but it's things in the future. It's future thinking, what's happening, but it's externally referencing what's happening. And experience has shown me that a lot of people focus what's happening here and now in their organisation, but if you ask senior leaders where the gap is in their rising talent, is that they're not always external referencing, they're not always knowing what's happening outside, and I think that's where professional bodies make a difference.
And I suppose that links into Mark's point from earlier as well about it's tactical things that's happening rather than the overall longer term strategy and how that all works really then together. So Prasad, I've got a wee question for you then. So in this technological age where skills are changing really rapidly, How important is ethical decision making? Is it still an essential skill that we need from bankers?
Oh, I mean, I think it's the bedrock of everything, basically, because technology is going to constantly change. I've always found that you could learn math, but to do the right thing is actually something that needs to be hammered home at all points. And going back to the whole professional body stuff, professional bodies will ensure that there is adherence to a code of conduct. That there is, we ourselves institute 5 hours of ethics CPD mandatory for all members, basically. So I think, without that ethical bit, the rest is, I've known too many bright people who can do a lot of things, but we did some weird stuff.
Richie, how do you? Your thoughts on
Yes,
that?
I go to point. I think ethics is important. And I think individuals, no one will set out to do bad things. It's just sometimes because of the conflict of interest, or sometimes they are in a position that's there's no clear right and wrong. And that's where ethics, I think, comes in, about sensitizing people about ethical principles and also practical ethical dilemma scenarios. So people can relate to, rather than just a set of codes and principles that people think is just what morally we need to do, but has to make it relatable that people then can be really help them in terms of the decision making when they face with certain kind of dilemma.
Thank you. Fiona, anything to add?
No.
No, you okay. Gavin?
I don't even think it's a question. I think, obviously I've worked in the banking industry for over 30 years. It's the bedrock of what we do. So, yeah. And I think what we need to focus on is there's a more complex environment than it was ever before, Joe, around helping people make those decisions in what is a really complex and ever-changing environment.
No, thank you for that. Gavin, I want to stay with you for the start of the next question, which is really about as people, we now require people to really evolve their skills throughout their careers. And just moving on from really that collaborative point that Mark made, was how can we work as professional bodies and organisations to encourage and support a culture that supports individuals to adapt to this change and remodel their skills? How do we work in that transition together?
So it has to be about collaboration, as you've said, Joe, and I think not everybody has the only answer to this. So for me, it's about how can you help us understand what those future areas are that we need to be focusing on, and then how do we help us educate people? I think from a cultural perspective, I think we see different people in different places where how do we help people understand the need to reskill, what that actually means. We talked about helping people find content. I think Mark talked about that before. I think how do we help people find brilliant content that's relevant? And again, I think that's where the Institute can play the institutes and our partners, in the broadest sense, can play a real key part for us. For example, one example from RBS, we just set up a data academy. We have a number of partners within that data academy because for two reasons. One's to help us understand from an advisory perspective what should be in there, but then secondly, from a provision of content and learning, we've got different people coming from different from areas. So I think collaboration around the what and the how, Joe, for me is key as we move forward.
I think one of the points that you've made to me previously as well is about that whole learning, getting the whole organisation being a learning organisation, being the sort of DNA.
And it's about getting people to understand that. I've written down when I go back, and some of my RBS colleagues are here, that financial services are the third lowest investment per head. I'll use that quite extensively when I go back. So it's not only the culture of investment, but it's also the culture, and to Rachel's point before around, there's no point in training people for a job that they're going to do in 6 or 12 months' time. So how systemically do we look at this? Just from the recruitment through to the business. And I think it's a business issue, not a learning issue or an HR issue or a institute issue.
And that's a strategic investment decision,
Absolutely.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's what makes it sustainable for those people. Thank you so much, Fiona.
I would agree with you, it's strategic investment. I think it's understanding what the skills are that you need. And when we talk, I'm a bit of a reflector. When I'm listening to what we're talking about, professional bodies and reskilling and developing colleagues, we can't forget about the customer. And there's core skills in risk management, as you said earlier, about collaboration, communication, but we can't lose sight when we talk about all of this, that we still have to consider the customer, what the customer wants. And most customers want to know that they're going to be safe and that the people they're dealing with know what they're doing. So there's still an element of making sure that colleagues understand the products, how to deal with customers when something goes wrong. And I think we need to remember that basic skills are still very, very important.
So is that customer first and building everything in that?
I definitely think it is. I think sometimes we can lose sight of the customer when we're talking about the digital age and the skills, etc. we need, but we can't lose sight of that, because at the end of the day, the customer, the most important interaction from a customer with us is when something goes wrong. That's usually when you hear from them. You have to have the staff with the right skills to be able to support and not lose sight of the basic skills.
I read something from Jen Tippin from LBG recently when talking about like future skills, and which sort of resonated with me, and she said machines do the ordinary and people do the extraordinary, and it's about being human, which I thought was really, really thoughtful.
And Joe, I think that customer point Mark talked about it, you know, our tech people need to understand customer more than ever, because they're building those customer journeys that people will use. So actually, when we talk about customer, everybody needs to understand that customer point. And that, I think, is a big opportunity for us, where before, would we have thought about talking to our coders about customer? Absolutely not.
I just wanted to add about, having said that, there's that causality, but I think there was a Deloitte study recently done that said a happy employee generally tends into a better customer experience as well. You know, so it really is, which way it goes, it's hard to tell, really.
And I think there's lots of research out there that absolutely shows you that if your employees are engaged and they're happy in the workplace, then you get much better, you know, customer service scores, and everything else that relates to that as well. I think that's absolutely true. So that's about treating people as humans, you know, and then optimising that too. Rachel, I wanted to come back to you with a sort of next question, which is, in the past, the Institute, we've given our members lots of choice about how they do their CPD. Obviously, we regulate how much they have to do in ethics each year, but by and large, we let them sort of choose how they make up their CPD allocation each year. And we were surprised with our most recent survey for CPD that our members felt 45% of them felt that their professional body should actually be giving them greater guidance on what are the new skills that they should be acquiring and what should they be studying for CPD. And of the other bulk, 31% thought that it was actually their employer. So that's hugely shifted from a place people were in the past, where they wanted that freedom to develop themselves and continue sort of lifelong learning. And I just, one of the things, given that sort of change in individuals' expectations, and what role do you think the professional bodies and the employers can play in supporting individuals in this digital era? Long question.
Quite interesting that those kind of feedback that you gather from your members are quite similar to those that we get in Singapore. Yeah, I think for quite a few areas, we also have mandatory CPD requirements, and some of the members come back to us. They say, "Why don't you just tell us this maybe 3 or 4 program to go, and then we just go for that?" I think sometimes maybe some of the members find they are lost with the choices. They just want very prescriptive kinds of guidelines to follow. But at the same time, I think some of the members, they see the need to, because different people in the same profession have, because of their jobs is slightly different, the business model is slightly different, may have slightly different needs. So they, some would like choices. But I think it's a combination that we need to give them some guidelines based on the industry consultation, and some, at the same time, based to cater to the different needs of the different employers.
And you had said in Singapore there was the senior managers, they looked for a much more tailored approach as well, didn't they?
Yes. Yeah, those from I think at the entry level, I think people are quite happy with the kind of guidance, the kind of programs made available. But as someone gets more senior, especially those who are at the managing director level, maybe C-2 level, they think the kinds of programs that they need to be more strategic. So they want to have more customized, designed programs. But at the same time, the challenge is at that level, there's less number of people. And yet they want more bespoke and customized training programs. So there is a challenge of how to design, have more bespoke programs, and yet have economies of scale to cater to a smaller group pool of people in that.
It's almost like that in that non-competitive environment, getting organisations to agree what the most important features are, aren't they, to get that sort of economies of scale. Ewan, have you got anything you would like to add to that
I
point?
might be a little bit controversial, but I think that it's the individual's responsibility to maintain their CPD, and if they choose to be a member of a professional body, that they will be expected to do a certain amount of CPD. I think you can expect your line manager to help you, but then a lot of line managers and organisations don't understand necessarily what CPD is, how important it is. So I think first of all it sits with the individual. I then think the professional bodies have a responsibility to make sure that whatever tools, knowledge development they've got is available, and that they encourage people to do it. But in the first instance, I think it's an individual's responsibility.
Thanks, Fiona. Gavin, do we need a re-education for people here?
I think, so I'll be slightly controversial as well. So I think we do need to re-educate some people, but not everybody. I think from an institute perspective, I think we need to think about, there is content now everywhere. So you know, Google, wherever, you can find content everywhere. So I think the institute's role is about how do you make that content credible and relevant. You know, if you think about, you know, YouTube, people follow certain bloggers because they trust what they say. So actually from an institute perspective, how are you putting the content that's out for people that they can consume digitally, that's relevant and that carries a level of competence and standard? Because people, I think, people are not just looking for the skills, but they're also looking to say, right, this is good quality material that's going to help me get to where I want to be. So that would be my build on that.
No, thanks for that. Ewan, I'm just going to come back to you just to ask about the whole debate about upskilling and reskilling, and whether that's, you know, what we've seen in the last 3 years, and how do you see that changing in the next 3 years, and also if there's anything the banking sector can learn from other industries regarding digital skills development and rapidly evolving job expectations.
I think over the last 3 years there's been a lot of talk about reskilling and upskilling colleagues, and people are looking at what we can do, how we can bring in talent. PSD2, for example, was something that for a number of banks was quite challenging because they didn't necessarily have the skill set there at the time. They then looked at, well, where do we get that skill set? Do we contract that in? And if they didn't have it, then having to go to the suppliers to pay over and above for that. So I think from a reskilling point of view, over the next 3 years, we're going to get better at it. And instead of, we're going to, talk the talk, or walk the walk. We're going to see a shift in the way organisations look at reskilling existing staff and looking at the skills they need. I think there's also, when we talk about reskilling and reskilling people into the digital or technological space, senior people need to be more tech savvy as well, so we can't forget about how we're going to educate people higher up and reskill them. So I think there'll be a shift. I think hopefully with the chat and talk about apprenticeship levy, that there'll be more money available via the apprenticeship levy to help organisations reskill. I certainly know from a Scottish viewpoint that a number of financial service organisations with the support of Chartered Banker, are looking at how can we put a proposal to government so that the apprenticeship levy is more flexible and available to reskill colleagues. So I think there's a lot of talk. I think that we will see change. I think we'll see more flexibility, and I think in the way that we do reskill, colleagues will change. Rather than, for example, putting somebody on an apprenticeship for data analytics, we might look at, well, what are the elements they actually need rather than doing a full apprenticeship. So I think there'll be more flexibility. I think as well that there'll be more sharing of what is available, more work done through colleges, and probably more through colleges than universities, if I'm being honest. So I think I think the landscape will change. I think it'll be much more flexible and more available.
Okay, thank you. Rach, could I just come from the Singapore perspective? Because you completed some surveys previously on this sort of topic and found that people got a bit lost and actually were discontented with that sort of process. Can you talk a wee bit about that whole sort of reskilling side of it and people's engagement with it? Just the sort of job evolution that they have?
We did a survey last year. There were about 1,000 respondents. We asked them about whether they see the changes are coming, and I think a significant proportion of the people, 60-70% of the people say yes, they see that the technology is changing the jobs, and they also think that they need to do something about that. But quite a significant proportion, maybe about 1/3 of them, they're saying they have not done anything. Even though things are changing, but they have not done anything. And the reason is because they don't know what to do. They think there is lack of information about the kind of training programs that will help them in terms of respond to the industry changes. So we're thinking it's an information gap that we need to plug, and is sometimes the danger is people know there are some changes and going on, but they don't know what to do with that. That will create anxiety. So we need to have more concrete recommendations that in response to help people to see the job role changes, how the job role is going to change. So then they know the context and what are the skills that is going to help them to respond to those changes, rather than if we just give them a list of skills, people would just get lost about whether what is the meaning, is it a propaganda about skill development. So it has to put context to the whole evolvement of jobs and what skills will help them to respond to the evolvement of jobs.
And it sort of links into that whole framework, doesn't it?
Yeah, Singapore's done we all concentrate on entry level and middle, and we're talking about the permafrost in the middle and all this. But importantly, when Mark was talking about demographics, Singapore, like most of the Western countries, is an aging economy, and they're looking into upskilling, reskilling all those who are about to retire. We're just not even looking at that category of 55s to 75s in most of the world as well. And as I mentioned earlier that you do have to have a little bit of a mandate, especially for us in Asia, where we never saw the impact of the global financial crisis. I mean, we had our Asian financial crisis, but because we didn't get that kick in the butt, the banks are certainly a little less likely to spend money on upskilling a lot of their employees. That I've noticed. But that's not true of the Standard Chartered, the HSBCs and the Citibanks of this world within Malaysia, for instance. And we do have something called the staff training expenditure. Banks are meant to put aside about 3% of their profits, I believe, for use in training. And that hardly ever gets used. So, I think the regulator has been gently as possibly they can, nudging people in that direction to do that more and more.
So building on that and your expertise, and it's different in different areas of the world, do you think then mandating professional qualifications and memberships the answer to enhancing and sustaining skills?
I think it's horses for courses, really. I mean, as I said, there's a reason behind why there's a little complacency in Malaysia, because there's been no issues. There's not been that anti-banker backlash. Bankers are incredibly trusted. It's not a very it's not a culture of litigation. People don't really complain, and so on and so forth. But we're all trying to get ahead of the curve before something does happen. I believe in a normally distributed world. I guarantee you that someone's oversold some insurance and stuff like that. And there's probably a Wells Fargo thing going on where we are. Because it's just human. I just believe in normal distributions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Rachel, mandatory qualifications and professional membership?
I think mandatory qualifications work in certain area, not across the board. I think Gavin made that point. I think some of the training need to be self-driven, so self-directed. Where we think mandatory certificate, actually we did some kinds of trying to do cross-sharing. We wrote to Simon Thompson from Chartered Institute of Bankers, Hong Kong, Malaysia, to ask about what is the area that they have mandatory certification and CPD requirements. What we gather from that's more kinds of cross-country kinds of information gathering. Those area that is in relation to handling customers in terms of advisory, I think those area for consumer banking, private banking, those area that's I think that quite a number of countries have mandatory certification or CPD requirements. Another area is risk management and compliance, because that will affect banking is about risk, about taking risk. So about risk management, about given all these rules and regulation changes, how compliance professionals need to have the appropriate set of skills to give appropriate advice. Those areas, I think, is worthwhile for us to look at making it mandatory, but certain for the other areas, because it's it's a kind of skill requirement, it's quite diverse based on different companies' business model, etc. So those maybe has to be more self-driven, self-directed.
Can I just? But you have to remember, it's always been mandatory to do licensing exams if you want to be a sales trader, etc., etc. It's always been, it's across jurisdictions. You literally have to do your exams before you can pick up the phones and trade and so on and so forth. But despite that, desks have blown up. There's been lots and lots of stuff, And one thing that I now realize is there's never been an ethics portion in any of those. The FSC, SFA exams that I used to do, the Hong Kong. There's never been. It's always been about technical skills. How do you? So I think it's about time that started to get infused in a lot of this stuff as well, basically. Okay. Just to give people
that ethical element which we talked about earlier. Gavin, you want anything that you would want to add?
I hate the word mandatory. I think
just stops you want to do it.
I just think it's there's definitely for certain things, as the guys have talked about, but I think we missed the point. And I think it's quite a lazy point for me, which is if we reposition learning properly with people, that people see the relevance and the value for it, then we won't have to make it mandatory. And I think we need to invest as much in that and the cultural piece around it, rather than going, right, we're telling you to do something, unless it keeps you safe and secure and our customers safe and secure. And so there's a balance.
That links into the whole individual point as well as on the back of that. So I suppose, Gavin, I'll come back to you then for my really hard final question, which is, what advice would you give your children? That I think might be too late now, but what advice would you give your children?
Now is move out and become financially independent quickly. That's not happening. I think like every parent, you would want to do your kids, you would ask your kids to do something that they enjoy. I think, Mark talked about it, it's not to follow the crowd. I think we put so much pressure on our kids now to go to university because it's almost the thing to do. And I think there are so many routes now to follow, so they should follow what the right route is for them and not be, I think our education system puts so much pressure on people to do the right thing. And then I think the final thing is to do something that's relevant and relevant for the future. And I think that's hard, but I think it is just, giving us the benefit of what we know today and trying to look into the future as best we can.
Thanks so much, Gavin.
I would just say, first of all, the bank of mum and dad is not a bank, it's not a real bank. I don't think there's anything wrong in a child finishing high school and taking time out to decide what they want to do. Experience from a graduate point of view is if you recruit graduates and they've had a year's experience before they come into a role, you get a much better outcome.
Yeah.
So I think as well we have to be flexible, we have to look at the child and treat the child as an individual and see what suits them. And no longer is it used to be said years ago, if you're going to leave school with nothing, you'd work in McDonald's, and actually McDonald's have got an excellent
program. Yeah.
So I think it's, as you say, a lot of pressure on kids, but there's lots of opportunities out there, and I think it's something that we should be able to sit down with our child and talk about and encourage them to do whatever they choose to do.
Thank you.
I just want to say, inculcate curiosity, really.
Yeah.
Just to constantly want to look something up.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, panellists. That's the end of our sort of formal questions, and I think we're actually just about to run into coffee breaks, which I'm sure you're all absolutely needing now. I'm sure my panellists would be delighted if you want to come and chat to them during the coffee break and if you've got any further questions. But I think the sort of key points is that regardless of where you are in the world, this is a global challenge for everyone, and actually the solution is in collaboration, and that will help everyone, individual and organisations, understand what the solutions will be. So thank you very much to all of my panelists, Prasad, Rachel, Rhiannon and Gavin. Thank you.